Bradley Morrison said, waving his hand at me like I was some intern who wandered into the wrong meeting. We were 3 minutes into the most important supplier negotiation of the year, and he'd already managed to insult both me and Colonel Kim, the man sitting across the video screen, who controlled 40% of our component supply from South Korea. My name is Rick Donovan. I'm 46 years old, and I've been doing this job longer than Bradley's been out of college. But that morning, watching this kid treat me like furniture in front of our biggest partner, I knew we were about to lose everything. And the worst part? He had no idea what was coming. I'd been with Summit Industrial for 12 years. Before that, 15 years in the Navy, most of it in the Pacific working logistics and procurement. That's where I learned Korean, Mandarin, and Japanese. That's also where I learned that respect isn't something you demand. It's something you earn through competence and cultural understanding. You know what really gets me? I learned Korean from guys who fought alongside American forces during the war. Old-timers who remembered when we were brothers in arms, bleeding together in places like Chosin Reservoir. They taught me that in Korea, business relationships aren't just about money. They're about honor, trust, and continuity. You don't just show up with a contract and expect someone to sign. You build something over years. Bradley Morrison had none of that understanding. What he had was a Harvard MBA, a Georgetown law degree, and most importantly, a father who owned the company. Charles Morrison might have founded Summit Industrial back in the 90s, but it was his spoiled son who was about to destroy everything the old man had built. See, Bradley came in 6 months earlier with what he called a revolutionary procurement strategy. Instead of managing individual relationships with dozens of suppliers across Asia, he wanted to bundle everything into one massive contract. Efficiency through consolidation, he kept saying, like he'd invented fire. He'd stand in front of whiteboards covered with flowcharts and buzzwords, talking about streamlined vendor matrices and optimized supply chains. I tried to explain why that wouldn't work. Asian business runs on relationships. These guys don't just want to know you can pay, they want to know they can trust you. They want to know that the person they're shaking hands with today will be the same person answering the phone next year. Colonel Kim's father had fought alongside Americans in Korea. The man took business relationships personally, like honor debts passed down through generations. But Bradley didn't want to hear it. Legacy thinking, he called my approach. We need to modernize these partnerships. Every time I brought up cultural protocols or relationship management, he'd get this look like I was talking about using smoke signals instead of email. The funny thing is, I saw this coming from a mile away. Back in 2019, when we first started working with Kim's company, I'd insisted on a specific clause in our framework agreement, Clause 12.3c. Took me 3 weeks to negotiate the exact wording, working with both American lawyers and their Korean legal team. The clause said that any major contract modifications had to be negotiated by the original authorized representative, me minus, or the entire deal could be terminated without penalty. Not just our primary contract, but all the downstream agreements too. Components, assembly, logistics, the whole supply chain. I wrote it myself in both English and Korean. Had it notarized and filed with the Seoul Commercial Court. Colonel Kim appreciated the detail, said it showed we understood proper business protocol. I even walked their legal team through it personally during my last visit to Busan, sitting in their conference room overlooking the harbor, drinking tea and going through every subsection. This protects both of us, I told him in Korean, ensures continuity of relationship. He nodded, impressed that I'd done the translation myself. Americans who understand continuity are rare, he said. This gives me confidence. Bradley never bothered to read the historical contracts, too busy posting LinkedIn updates about disrupting traditional supply chains and taking selfies at industry conferences. He had his assistant print out one-page summaries of our key vendor relationships like you could reduce 12 years of trust building to bullet points on PowerPoint slides. When I heard he'd scheduled the Kim meeting without including me, I knew exactly what would happen. I tried to warn him, caught him in the hallway 2 days before, right outside his corner office with the motivational posters and the standing desk he never used. You might want me in that room, I said. Kim's old school about protocol. Expects to deal with people he knows. He actually laughed, adjusting his tie like he was getting ready for a magazine shoot. Rick, I appreciate your experience, but I've got this. Don't want to confuse them with too many voices. Plus, I speak their language, business. Their language, right? This from a guy who probably couldn't order coffee in Korean, let alone navigate the complex relationship dynamics that keep international supply chains running. Bradley, This isn't just business to them, it's about respect, continuity, legacy thinking, Rick. We're moving into the modern era. Confuse them? This from a guy who probably couldn't find Seoul on a map 6 months ago, so that morning I showed up anyway. Wasn't on the invite list, but I figured I'd sit in the back, maybe salvage things when Bradley inevitably stepped in it. What I didn't expect was for him to treat me like the help in front of our most important client. The conference room was too quiet for how big this call was. Just the low hum of the projector fan and Bradley shuffling through printed pages like he'd written them himself. He wore that navy sport coat he thought made him look executive, even though it bunched at the shoulders and the sleeves were too long. Perfect metaphor, really. All right, team. He chirped like we were about to demo some new app. Colonel Kim's about to hear a proposal that'll change everything. Just sit back and watch the magic happen. The screen flickered to life. Colonel Kim's face appeared, stone still unreadable. His background showed a pale wall lined with traditional calligraphy and a single blue and white ceramic vase. Nothing flashy, nothing accidental. Everything in that frame was deliberate, respectful. I gave a small nod. When our eyes met, he returned it. Barely perceptible. He remembered me. Good. Bradley didn't even wait for proper greetings. He launched into his pitch like a late-night infomercial. Colonel Kim, fantastic to connect. Hope you're doing amazing over there. I've prepared a comprehensive presentation walking through the incredible benefits of unifying our agreements under a revolutionary streamlined procurement structure. Very cutting edge, very scalable. He was speaking loudly, slowly, like volume would somehow translate nuance across time zones and cultures. I watched Colonel Kim's expression stay perfectly neutral, but I'd seen that look before. The last time was when a German distributor sent a team that tried to skip formalities and dive straight into unit pricing. That deal died before dessert was served. What we're proposing, Bradley continued, clicking through slides full of corporate buzzwords, is a paradigm shift toward efficiency maximization. One contract, one point of contact, one streamlined relationship. Think of it as supply chain 2.0, supply chain 2.0. Jesus. Colonel Kim listened politely, but I could read the micro-expressions. The slight tightening around his eyes when Bradley said streamlined relationship. The almost imperceptible pause when he mentioned one point of contact. In Korean business culture, those weren't selling points, they were insults. Then Bradley made his fatal mistake. He turned to me with that smirk, the one he'd been practicing since prep school. Actually, Rick, could you go grab us some coffee? Maybe some of those pastries from the break room. I want to keep this focused. The room temperature dropped about 10 degrees. Not literally, but you could feel it. Colonel Kim's face went completely blank. What Koreans call stone face. It's not anger, it's something worse. It's the look you get when you've committed an unforgivable breach of protocol. See, in Korean culture, publicly dismissing a senior person like that isn't just rude, it's a statement about your entire organization's values. It says you don't respect experience, hierarchy, or competence. It says you're the kind of people who treat knowledge like background noise. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back with a deliberate scrape across the floor. Bradley's smirk widened like he thought he'd just reasserted dominance in front of a client. He had no idea he'd just lit the fuse on a bomb I'd built 4 years ago. I turned to the camera, looked directly at Colonel Kim, and spoke in perfect Korean. I apologize deeply for this disrespect, Colonel Kim. This person does not have authority to speak for our company under our existing framework. Just a few sentences, but they landed like artillery rounds. Colonel Kim's eyebrows went up maybe 0.5 millimeter, which for him was like jumping out of his chair. Then he nodded once, sharp and decisive. The room went dead silent. Bradley's mouth was hanging open like someone had just told him his trust fund was fake. What? What did you just say? Why are you speaking Chinese? Korean? I corrected, and I was explaining contract protocol. Colonel Kim turned to Bradley and spoke in clearer English than Bradley had used all meeting. Mr. Morrison, this negotiation is terminated. Please review Clause 12.3c of our framework agreement. You are not authorized to modify our relationship. He looked directly into the camera, straight through the screen at me. Mr. Donovan, when you're ready to discuss our partnership under proper authority, please contact my office directly. Click, call ended. The silence in that room was nuclear. Bradley stared at the blank screen like he was watching his future evaporate in real time. His hand hovered over his laptop like he wasn't sure whether to close it or throw it. What the hell just happened? He said, voice cracking somewhere between confusion and panic. I sat back down slowly. opened the contract file I'd saved on my phone, and slid it across the table. That was the sound of a $65 million relationship exploding. And you handed me the matches. He stared at the screen, reading Clause 12.3c for the first time in his privileged life. The part about unauthorized negotiators, the part about immediate termination rights, the part about downstream contract cancellation, the part with my signature on it in both English and Korean. You could have warned me about this, he stammered. I did warn you. Tuesday in the hallway. You told me not to confuse them with too many voices. But this is just a technicality. We can fix this, right? Call them back, explain it was a misunderstanding. I looked at him like he'd just asked if we could fix gravity. Bradley, you don't understand. In Korean business culture, what you just did wasn't a mistake. It was an insult. You publicly disrespected the relationship, then tried to negotiate without authority. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a character judgment. The color was draining from his face as the implications hit him. So what happens now? Now you get to explain to your father why we just lost our biggest supplier, our Defense Department certification, and about 280 American jobs. By lunchtime, our legal team was in full crisis mode. They'd pulled every contract we had with Kim's network, and they were all connected like dominoes. Lose the main deal, lose the subsidiary agreements, lose the component supply, lose the assembly contracts. Lose those, lose our ability to fulfill existing Pentagon orders. It was like pulling one critical card from a house of cards built over 12 years. Laura Mitchell, our senior counsel, was the first to understand the full scope. She'd been with the company almost as long as me, and I'd never seen her look that pale. Rick, this clause you wrote, it's not just Kim's primary contract. It cascades through all their related suppliers? I nodded. Automotive components, electronics, even the packaging materials. Everything flows through their network. She flipped through pages of interconnected agreements, her highlighter working overtime. Sweet Mother of God. We're looking at total supply chain collapse for the Asian operations. The numbers were uglier than anyone expected. $65 million in immediate contract losses, another $30 million in penalty fees and rework costs, but that was just the beginning. Summit Industrial wasn't just any company, we were a Department of Defense subcontractor. Our components went into radar systems, communication equipment, and navigation computers for military aircraft. Losing Korean components meant we couldn't fulfill our commitments to Lockheed Martin, couldn't deliver to Boeing, couldn't meet our obligations to 3 different Pentagon programs that were already behind schedule. How long do we have? Asked Jennifer Walsh, our CFO, looking like someone had just told her the building was on fire. The existing orders, 90 days, I said. After that, we're in breach of federal contracts and alternative suppliers with the right security clearances and quality certifications. 18 months minimum. Maybe 24 if we're talking about the sensitive electronics. The room went quiet except for the sound of calculators and keyboards. Someone was running worst-case scenarios, and from the expressions around the table, worst case was looking optimistic. Within 48 hours, we had federal auditors crawling through our books like termites. The Department of Commerce wanted to know how a critical supplier relationship had been terminated by an unauthorized personnel action. The Pentagon sent their own team to review our security protocols and supply chain management. In Washington speak, that meant someone was going to pay for this mess, and it wasn't going to be the government. I'll never forget the lead auditor, a stern woman named Patricia Henley, who looked like she'd been investigating procurement failures since the Cold War. She sat across from me with a stack of files and a recording device. Mr. Donovan, you authored the clause that triggered this termination. Yes, ma'am. And you were present during the negotiation that activated it? I was. In your professional opinion, could this situation have been avoided? I looked at her for a long moment. Ma'am, I wrote that clause specifically to prevent unauthorized personnel from damaging our supplier relationships. It worked exactly as designed. She made a note. And the person who triggered the clause, was he aware of its existence? He was briefed on the need to include me in Korean negotiations. He chose not to. I see. More notes. Mr. Donovan, in your 15 years of military service and 12 years in civilian procurement, have you ever seen a supply chain failure of this magnitude caused by a single meeting? No, ma'am, but I've never seen someone treat a strategic partnership like a PowerPoint presentation either. Bradley tried to spin it, of course, called emergency meetings with buzzwords like pivot opportunity and strategic realignment. He brought in consultants who'd never been east of Cleveland to explain how we could leverage disruption for competitive advantage. Problem was, none of the alternative suppliers had the security clearances we needed, none of them had been vetted by Defense Department standards, and none of them could deliver components in less than 18 months. We had 90 days. That's when Charles Morrison finally stepped in. The old man had been letting Bradley play CEO in training, but when the Pentagon started asking questions about his son's judgment, playtime was over. He called an emergency board meeting and laid out the situation like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying every one of his 68 years, "we have three options. File Chapter 11, sell the Asian operations to a competitor, or find someone who can salvage this mess." He looked around the room of pale faces and nervous energy. Then his eyes landed on me. "Rick, you wrote the clause that's destroying us. Can it be undone?" I'd been waiting for that question for a week. The clause was designed to protect both parties from exactly this situation. But Korean business culture allows for face-saving measures. It would require a formal apology, acknowledgement of proper protocol, and probably a face-to-face meeting in Seoul. Bradley jumped in like he'd been waiting for his cue. "I could fly there next week, smooth things over. I mean, it's just business, right? They can't stay mad forever." The silence in that room was deafening. Even the intern could have read that room better than Bradley. Charles Morrison looked at his son like he was seeing him clearly for the first time in 29 years. The disappointment on that old man's face was almost painful to watch. "Son," he said quietly, "you are the reason we're in this mess. You're off this account. Permanently. Dad, come on, I can fix this." "It's just a cultural misunderstanding, Bradley." The steel in the old man's voice could have cut glass. "You disrespected our most important partner, ignored expert advice, and violated protocols that took 12 years to establish. You're not fixing anything. You're done." He turned back to me. "Rick, what would it take? Full authorization to renegotiate, new terms that respect their cultural expectations, and a guarantee that unauthorized personnel will never touch their contracts again. Done, whatever you need." But I was already 3 steps ahead. That morning, I'd gotten a call from Hanley Strategic Solutions. They'd heard about Summit's troubles through industry channels. More importantly, they'd heard about my background and my relationship with Asian suppliers. The conversation was short and sweet. "Mr. Donovan, we need someone to head our new Pacific Operations Division. Full authority, dual offices in Seattle and Singapore. Starting salary 40% above your current compensation, plus equity. Interested?" I was. Very interested. My resignation letter was 1 paragraph long. "Effective immediately. I'm accepting a position as VP Pacific Operations with Hanley Strategic Solutions. All transition materials are in my office safe. The combination is in the sealed envelope on your desk." The sealed envelope also contained copies of every supplier contact I'd built over 12 years, every cultural protocol I'd learned, and every relationship I'd cultivated. All of it was going with me to Hanley, where people understood the value of experience over entitlement. Summit Industrial tried to counteroffer. Charles Morrison himself called my cell phone at 11 p.m., offering me Bradley's corner office, his salary, his parking space, his expense account. "Name your price, Rick. We need you. Mr. Morrison, it's not about money, it's about respect. And that ship sailed when your son told me to get coffee in front of Colonel Kim. Rick, please. We can make this right. Sir, with respect, some things can't be unmade. Your son didn't just insult me, he insulted everything your company claims to stand for. Integrity, partnership, cultural understanding. How do you walk that back? Too late. Trust, like respect, isn't something you can negotiate after you've blown it up." The company tried everything, brought in crisis management consultants who charged $500 an hour to suggest relationship repair strategies, sent expensive gifts to Korea that got returned unopened, even hired a Korean-American attorney to draft formal apology letters that never got answered. Nothing worked. The black mark was permanence. Summit Industrial sold their Asian operations 6 months later for 30 cents on the dollar. Couldn't fulfill the Pentagon contracts without Korean components. Lost their security clearance when they missed delivery deadlines. Had to lay off 280 people, just like I'd predicted. 2 production facilities shut down permanently. Bradley got reassigned to business development, which is corporate speak for we can't fire the owner's son, but we can make him irrelevant. Last I heard, he was working on strategic partnerships with companies that didn't exist and initiatives that went nowhere. Meanwhile, Hanley Strategic landed 3 major defense contracts in our first year. Turns out the Pentagon likes working with people who understand both military protocol and international relationships. Colonel Kim not only restored our partnership, he expanded it. Brought in 2 of his affiliated suppliers and recommended us to contacts in Japan and Taiwan. Americans who understand honor are rare. He told me over dinner in Seoul. This gives me great confidence in the future. We tripled the original contract value within 18 months. The final chapter happened at the National Defense Industrial Conference in Arlington last month. I was there representing Hanley, discussing our new multi-billion-dollar partnership with Korean aerospace suppliers. We'd become the go-to firm for companies that needed both technical expertise and cultural competency in Asian markets. That's when I saw him. Bradley Morrison, standing at a booth for Metropolitan Insurance Group, wearing a cheap off-the-rack suit and a desperate smile. He was trying to sell liability policies to defense contractors, working the crowd like a used car salesman at a church function. The irony was perfect. The guy who'd treated international partnerships like interchangeable widgets was now hawking insurance to the same industry that had blacklisted his father's company. He saw me coming and tried to duck behind a display board. But there was nowhere to hide in that narrow booth. When I walked up, he straightened his tie and forced a grin that looked like it physically hurt. "Rick, hey, great to see you, man. Heard you landed at Hanley. That's really great. Good for you." I nodded politely. Behind him, I could see Colonel Kim approaching our booth, probably looking for me to discuss the expansion into Vietnam operations. "How's the insurance business treating you?" I asked. His smile flickered like a dying light bulb. "It's different, but good, really good." Learning a lot about risk management, he forced a laugh. "Turns out I'm pretty good at identifying potential problems before they happen." "I bet you are." Colonel Kim reached us and bowed slightly. In Korean, he said, "Mr. Donovan, are you ready for our 3 o'clock meeting? I have the contracts for the new facility in Ho Chi Minh City." I replied in Korean, "Absolutely, Colonel. Looking forward to reviewing the expansion plans." Bradley's face went white as paper. He finally understood what he'd lost that day he told me to get coffee. Not just a contract, not just a job, but an entire world of relationships and opportunities he'd never bothered to learn how to enter. As we walked away, Colonel Kim asked quietly in English, "Was that the young man from the meeting?" "Yes," I said, "the one who didn't understand protocol." He nodded thoughtfully. In Korea we have a saying, "The nail that sticks up gets hammered down," but sometimes the hammer breaks before the nail does. Some lessons cost $65 million, 280 jobs, and an entire company's future. But the most expensive lesson Bradley Morrison learned wasn't about money or business or even respect. It was about what happens when you treat knowledge like background noise and experience like dead weight. Sometimes the person you're dismissing is the only thing standing between you and complete disaster. And sometimes when you tell them to get coffee, they walk out the door and take everything you didn't know you needed with them. The best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. And watching your enemies get exactly what they deserve. In business, as in war, the most dangerous enemy is the one who underestimates the intelligence of his allies, because when you finally need them most, they're already fighting for the other side. Experience isn't just about what you know, it's about knowing what you don't know and having the wisdom to respect those who do.